Hi, this is Lex, and welcome to the Fintech Blueprint. It's your podcast about fintech, decentralized finance, digital banking, investing, robo-advice, artificial intelligence, and all the other frontier technology that is transforming financial services. To get more content, like an illustrated transcript of this conversation in your inbox, subscribe at fintechblueprint.com. So without further delay, let's jump into today's episode. Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's conversation. We are lucky to have with us David Beiner, who's the CEO and founder at Hume. And we're going to be talking about creativity, the metaverse, how people are building new types of experiences, new types of music experiences, as well as more broadly, everything that's going on in this space. David, welcome to the conversation.
It's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. I always like to get a sense of your background early on, like what were your formative career experiences, educational experiences that led you to such an interesting place. So maybe if you can tell us about kind of like the early DNA of the types of things you were doing in the beginning of your career.
Yeah, I think, if we're thinking about like how I got here and what one of those early moments might have been at NYU, I was in the Gallatin School, which is one of those schools where you get to design your own major, which has its pros and cons. But mine was around entrepreneurship and economic history, and which was really a way of, saying business and economics. But I was 18 and, that's the route I chose. And one very cool thing that happened was we had someone from IBM come and speak in one of our classes, and that I somehow ended up being, one of the only people in the class that got to have this internship with this was my junior and senior year of college, with a very small team at IBM whose job it was, this is like 2011 to give context. And the job of this team was to figure out how businesses were going to use social media platforms. And to give more context, at this time, the like button on Facebook, I think either didn't exist or had just been launched. Twitter, advertising on Twitter was just starting. It was really the beginning of everything that I don't want to say take for granted now, but that we just have come to accept as, part of our world now. And, when I think about, there were two things in that, in school that kind of led to, I think about that internship, which was basically being with a bunch of incredibly smart people who helped teach me how to think about how media was going to change and evolve and push boundaries, and that kind of intersection between tech and media. And then the other, I had a class completely around the 2008 financial crisis. And to put that in one sentence, I came out of that class with, having learned that the US, dollar and monetary systems and many shapes and forms are effectively made up, which is often the rallying cry of many early crypto adopters.
It's a bit difficult to get that sort of existential truth, where it's like everything is made up and none of the systems are real. They're only held up by our belief in the systems. And then, if you get into like neuroscience and biology, it's like actually not only are our systems made up, but our body just renders a narrative that is completely false. And everything we know is just a hallucination that we tell ourselves. And I think that's when you start getting into kind of stand-up comedy territory and the Camus view on everything is so absurd. The only thing you can do to deal with it is laugh. Besides that, besides the philosophical crisis, can you tell me a little bit about the bit around like that small team that was looking at social media and, the like button's not there yet? Like, what are the things that you saw that were hypotheses and then maybe came to fruition?
They were obsessed with Tumblr, and they had actually set up a IBM blog through Tumblr. So where I'm going with this is one of the categories they were very hyper focused on was this idea of like niche communities being formed. And I think, that's become increasingly true as we've seen the evolution of the internet. And when we think of Web3 and NFTs, Web3, I think is just a super hyper on steroids version of micro niches. And in this case, as those micro niches start to look and feel like miniature economies. So I think about, that obsession, and I ended up spending a lot of time on Tumblr, and Tumblr was a place then where you really saw these, whether it was around photography or architecture, or in the case of IBM, a lot of the people they were interacting with for, better or worse, quote unquote, futurists and futurism. So that was a very interesting.
It's okay to say it. It's okay to say it.
It's okay.
It's all right.
I like to say it. People have sometimes, people.
We can put it all out there. Singularity,
metaverse,
all of it,
futurism. Yeah. Well, we'll use all the buzzwords today. So that was very interesting with the micro niches. And then the other one was just, it's not as easy to pin down, but there was just a constant thought around like, how are companies going to use, these social media platforms to advertise to us, which is funny to think that there were people actually thinking about it. Because again, that's so obvious now that we use content to effectively drive engagement and drive product sales. But I remember being in like a 30-minute brainstorm about how Coca-Cola could possibly use Twitter to sell you a can of Coke and how it would be connected to the Internet of Things. And I think about where we are today with Web3, and, you have, I think, specifically you look at someone like G Money with the 9DCC brand, which is effectively a streetwear high-end apparel company where there's a micro niche community that is buying a really nice, cool black t-shirt that comes with an NFC chip that effectively allows you to show your ownership of that product upon receiving it. And their main driving platform is Twitter. So I'm happy you asked the question, because I haven't thought about how formative that was in a while. But now that we're here
we are. These two things kind of led you into a career where you're able to practice, some of these new media and creative skill sets, right?
Yeah. So I ended up, my first job was, I was a tour guide for a little right after college and some other fun things, but we'll skip those. But my first credible established job was with a firm called Vaudeville Ventures. And at Vaudeville, we were often working with huge media brands like Comcast / NBC, MGM. We worked with the NFL, and really helping these companies effectively launch tech products. So like Comcast had a product called Watchable, which was kind of like TikTok meets Quibi. You had, creators going on the platform, creating short form video content. And then what was also interesting, and I think also kind of an early version of what today could have been a great Web3 project, for MGM, we launched a streaming platform for a specific TV show. And that TV show was Stargate, for any Stargate fans out there. And you basically paid $20 a month. They brought out there were 2 seasons of Stargate that no one had access to. So now you had access to those 2 seasons. And there was a 3rd season that would be revealed if you were paying the $20 a month. And then there was also merch, and all of this you only had access to if you were paying the $20 a month. And I often think about that project and how if it was a Web3 NFT project that came out in, October of 2021, where if you bought a Stargate PFP, you were going to get access to all this content plus an exclusive merch drop. I think that could have been quite successful, but we didn't have Web3 yet. So I was doing that, and I guess the next question might be, so when did the crypto part start?
How did that sneak into your experience?
To go back when I was taking that class about the financial crisis, I obviously at some point came across Bitcoin. I think in like 2014 with, I was like, I've got $500 to do whatever I want with. I bought one Bitcoin. And then I really didn't know what had happened to Bitcoin. I didn't really track it. And then somewhere around late 2016, I had been working for a little bit and I was like, I should, invest some money properly. And properly for me meant looking up what had happened in the world of cryptocurrency. And I came across Ethereum and I, was obviously fascinated that there was not just a currency, but there was a network that would allow you to build applications on top of it. And that this wasn't just about transferring money, it was about transferring value. And that value could come in the form of, non-fungible tokens, which could be digital objects, everything from a virtual piece of clothing to a virtual record. And shortly after early 2017, I, along with two other friends, one with more of a finance background and one with a computer science background who now works over at Off-Chain Labs, which is the company behind the L2 Arbitrum, we started Abacus, which was basically a research and consulting company. And from 2017 to 2019, we read a lot, we wrote a lot, and we worked with, some smaller wealth management firms and companies to basically try and explain crypto to them. By 2019, not that many people were interested anymore. So that was when I, started to take Hume more seriously.
We did say the words new media, which I think satisfies what futurists would want to hear. Now we're transitioning to the metaverse. Tell us about kind of your discovery, your starting Hume, what Hume is, and then maybe some of the early things you were seeing with NFTs.
Hume is a Web3 entertainment company focused on creating Metastars. What's a Metastar? It is a fully 3D animated virtual artist. So we believe that there's going to be an artist at the same level as Drake, Rihanna, Billie Eilish, Taylor Swift, insert your favorite music artist, who is completely 3D. We kind of think of this sometimes in the way Pixar came out with Toy Story and it put 3D movies on the map. Hume will we'll have that Metastar moment, that virtual artist moment where Metastars are now on the map, and these 3D virtual artists are not only performing routinely in the metaverse, but also just, people, they're on TikTok, you're listening to their music on Spotify, almost to the point that you wouldn't even know that you are engaging with a virtual artist. And the second part of Hume is we believe that a lot of that engagement is going to be fan driven, and that NFTs can unlock new types of fan experiences that effectively allow you to guide the journey of that virtual artist and Metastar. So that's what Hume is. How we got there, I was living with my roommate and now co-founder, no longer roommates anymore, Jay Stolar. And Jay's background, Jay had originally been, he was a music artist. So, I used to go to Jay's shows in the Lower East Side, and he was releasing music on Spotify. And to be a successful music artist in this day and age, you either need to have a social media following in the millions so that you can have, tons of brand partnerships, or /plus, you are streaming in, 50 million streams, 100 million streams. The numbers really have to get quite large because streaming doesn't pay that much. So even though he had some early success, where he really started to shine was also around 2017. So when I was making that transition over more into crypto and Web3, he started writing, working as a songwriter and producer for other artists. So Jay started to work with Aloe Black. He's had songs with Demi Lovato, Selena Gomez, G-Eazy, and I'm kind of, I'm in my part of the apartment thinking about smart contracts and NFTs and, crypto kitties. That was the best example at the time. And I'm realizing from Jay that most artists on planet Earth do not write their own music. Obvious, there are exceptions. Taylor Swift, who's had a lot of success this week, is one of them who does write a lot of her own music. But most of the artists, most of the giant pop stars you listen to do not write their own music. It's written by songwriters, many of them in LA, who get in a room, 3, 4, 5 people. They'll write a song. That song will then get pitched to the artist team, and the artist's team will then potentially bring it to the artist. And at some point, it is decided what the artist might record that song and it doesn't even make it on the album. At some point, though, some of those songs make it onto an album or into a single release. And that is how the world of, songs coming out in the world actually works. It's not as romantic as people would like it to be. So I'm seeing this, and Jay and I start talking late at night after our work days, and I start telling Jay, virtual money is here. Now it's 2018, 2019. I was like, I know it seems like it's going away, but virtual money's here. It's going to come back. And when it comes back, there's going to be a need for virtual entertainment. Let's call it metaverse entertainment. There's going to be objects that you can buy and interact with in this metaverse. And effectively, what's the difference between writing music for a mainstream artist or writing music and using, the same teams that write music for some of the biggest artists on earth, and writing music for a piece of IP, virtual IP that we own and that we can create the story and brand around and monetize as we see fit and create a Web3 ecosystem around. And, after many conversations, eventually we started to do a version of that, which I call early Hume. We had these 2 virtual artists called Ivan and Peter, and they were kind of comedic DJs that appeared on TikTok, fully animated, had some music come out on Spotify. And that early experiment kind of led us to our seed round in August of 21.
This all builds on some prior art too, right? So Little Michaela is the one that comes to mind, where it's an Instagram influencer who is rendered and photoshopped and has millions and millions of followers, including being rendered into various videos and music experiences and so on. Is it right that Trevor, who built Little Michaela and the organization behind it, also built Friends with Benefits? Am I getting that right?
I think you are correct. I know he's very involved with Friends with Benefits, and he founded Brud, the company behind Michaela.
Again, I don't know if this is right or not, but like in Japanese pop culture, it's
Hatsune.
Yeah, it's not uncommon to have bands that are fully rendered.
They're way ahead of us on that side of the world. And there's a great example who I believe now has been retired, but in 2015, I believe, around that time, Hatsune Miku came onto the scene, actually sold out shows, should perform as a hologram, and actually, I think, sold out shows outside of Japan, even in Paris, I believe. And, I think Hatsune Miku was a great example of an early virtual artist. And I think Michaela is a, great example of that first kind of influencer with, fashion collaborations, being on Instagram. And I think we look at the work of both those projects and think about, how those kind of set the, if you want to think about like early primitives for virtual humans, but they were set by those 2 projects in many ways.
And you have a bunch of other strange trends going on too, right? The hologram one, I think there was a Tupac performance where he was a hologram because he's not alive anymore. And then you've got like the deep fakes transforming into just generative art and generative AI more broadly. So being able to scan people's faces and then output those faces and tie them to particular language models and voice generations and so on. There's a fantastic company that makes avatars of fake people for like business settings. It's amazingly dystopian, but I think there was a news item maybe like 2 years ago where you would be trained how to fire people in VR, using these fake people who would display all the emotions. And
that sounds very dystopic. That sounds like a Black Mirror episode.
There we are. Before we kind of double click more on Hume and avatars and the economic system underneath, I also want to talk to you about the Bored Apes Club and your experience with it, because I'm guessing that some of the interaction with that had an effect on inspiration. So could you maybe talk about like how you first came across apes and what your journey was there?
So when we were raising the seed round and we met G Money, and G Money, founder of 9DCC and Admit One, and was very early investor in Hume, but he talked to me a bunch about CryptoPunks. And I don't think at the time I had fully appreciated the culture that had built around CryptoPunks. And he invited us to this party in Miami that was a CryptoPunk party. And to give, even more light, this is like April, May of 21. So this isn't like it's not like a crazy crypto party that where a bunch of people were at and it was just pure insanity. This was pretty early, and it was really just a bunch of people who owned CryptoPunks getting together because their ownership of this virtual profile picture and this virtual way of representing themselves, mostly on Twitter, created a common bond around them. And I saw that and I was like, it looked like what you see at the kind of culture that you see, whether it's a Comic-Con convention or even like on the other side of that spectrum, when high-end fashion brands like, Porsche will put together these events like just for people who own Porsches. It had different elements from all of those kind of brand get-together. And that was kind of an aha moment of like, wow, there are niche communities forming around NFTs. And up until that point, I had thought of NFTs more as digital merchandise that would be sold. And then, that obviously had me looking more at the world on Twitter. And I don't know if it was, I'll say it was luck. It was like 1 a.m. and I saw people on Twitter talking about Bored Apes, and I went and looked at it and I got one. But the main reason I got one actually was I had now witnessed this kind of like niche community that could form around a PFP. But the thing that really blew my mind that I hadn't seen before was if you owned the Bored Ape, you would own all the IP around your Bored Ape. And to me, this was kind of like, oh my God, they're open sourcing IP. And when you look at, the history of technology, when you open source things, they tend to take off because now you have a bunch of content and applications, and anything is possible. You're unleashing human ingenuity. And, the thought that people were going to buy these characters and now could own all the IP around them was fascinating to me. So that honestly ends up tying quite directly to Hume, because we closed the seed and now it's August. And if you think I think Bored Apes had launched in April or May, and now it's August and Bored Apes are starting to have some traction. And I'm starting to think like, okay, this idea of like purchasing a PFP, an NFT that you own all the IP of, has huge implications, because this means that there's a niche culture around this IP that is going to gravitate towards any IP that you build around the PFP that you just bought. And B, it means that you can buy one of these and build your own world around it. And in our case, that obviously meant, what if we were to buy an NFT and build a virtual artist around it? So instead of, at this point, Ivan and Peter just randomly releasing music NFTs, instead of doing that, what if we purchased an actual NFT from an existing collection and turned that into a music artist? And if we did that, I thought of it as like the example I would use like with my mom, because she is slowly understanding what I do. But I would kind of explain it like if Aladdin was an NFT and, Disney had an NFT marketplace and you could buy Aladdin and now turn Aladdin into this music virtual artist, you will at least guarantee that people are going to watch and people are going to engage for at least the first couple weeks. And even though that may sound insignificant, if you think about like the hardest part of launching any product, of launching a artist, of getting a movie out into the world, of literally starting anything, is like, where do those first fans or users come from? And here, these NFT collections kind of introduced a way of guaranteeing you had those first eyeballs, at least from day one. And then you would quickly know whether or not people were actually attracted to the product you were creating. And that led us to purchasing angelbaby, where at the time was just, I don't remember their FLUF number. Let's FLUF 3871 from FLUF WORLD. And we started creating angelbaby.
One of the ironies of the last kind of 4 years is how many people try to build decentralized identity the hard way, which is, like, we're going to build passports and we're going to figure out how to get certificates off of like sheepskin and into the internet. And we're going to have to make sure that, it's like Sybil resistant and there's like the full data exhaust of everything you've done. And we're going to map that to these attributes, which are then going to be soul bound, blah, 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 and like the way identity has won in Web3 is like you buy a rendering that you identify with because it's cool and you want to be like the other people that are also cool.
Yeah.
And that's it. That's like your identity.
Yeah. As smart as we all want to be, somehow it always comes back to like, I like shiny thing, or I like that thing. That thing is cool.
Yeah. Or like the social pressure of it.
Social pressures, and just going back to, at the end of the day, our brains are wired a certain way.
I think that that's a good kind of container for the ideas around avatars, community, tribes, and things of that nature. Can you talk a little bit about the economics of what you're doing implies? Like, what are the new things here in terms of economic possibilities? How large are they, and what has to be in place for them to work?
So I kind of break it into two parts. In the background, which doesn't have as much to do with the Web3 piece, is the way in which we're thinking about creating this music and the way we're interacting with songwriters. And on the Web3 part, the way that we're approaching NFTs is really about unlocking fan experiences and what can kind of be evolved from there. So I guess let's start with the Web3 part. So my biggest thing with NFTs was we need a way for people to actually use them and have some value out of them. Besides, as great as it is to have a PFP, and there's a lot of value in that, it would be really interesting if NFTs actually unlocked experiences. And in our case, we were thinking about how NFTs could unlock experiences that effectively let you be part of the, let's call it the creative journey of an artist. There's a lot of decisions that a virtual artist in this case needs to make, like which song should be their lead single, what their merch should look like, eventually, what their set list should be at a show. And we thought of NFTs as a way of unlocking this experience for those people. And you could even argue that in unlocking that experience, you are now part of the artist to a certain degree. So what the Hume Genesis allows you to do is we've launched this platform called The Spot. Your Hume Genesis allows you to sign into that platform and make decisions, which in this case is angelbaby. So a couple of weeks ago, you went through this token-gated experience. You could only get to the end if you had the Hume Genesis, and you chose between these two songs that could be released, and the fans chose the first single. Each NFT in this, we have 3 tiers of these NFTs, and they come with a different level of voting power. So Legendary has the most voting power, Ultra Rare has the second most amount of voting power, and then rare has the least voting power. And what is interesting about this is, as Angelbaby becomes a larger and larger artist, you have people who are literally part of that experience, and they're making decisions with Angelbaby. And I think for us, we think of it as a whole new way of being part of an artist's career. And we have a whole theory on royalty sharing and why we don't necessarily think it totally works in the future. But I think for us, it's about allowing people to be part of a artist's journey and experience and being part of the creation and launch of all that IP. And if you have, let's use like Justin Bieber for a second. If there was an NFT out there for Justin Bieber that was allowing you to make choices on behalf of Justin Bieber, just as a fan, more and more, and there's a limited supply of those assets, just as a fan, you're going to want to have access to that asset to be part of this world that is effectively like running parts of Justin Bieber's life. It's a lot harder to do that with a human artist, which is why there's a lot of possibility there with a virtual artist. But that's where we see a lot of value deriving. And I really do believe that NFTs that can unlock experiences that are not as obviously financial is how we get to, tens of millions of people, eventually billions of people actually owning and using NFTs.
Yeah, I have an example from the visual art world of an experiment that I was kind of obsessed with to my own detriment. I think many of us were. But these are just such interesting financial constructs. And it's difficult to tell what is the value. Like the entertainment experience of being able to tell Bieber what to do. That's a ticketed kind of consumption type of, you are entertained by being able to do that. You eat an apple, the value of the apple's gone. Once you eat it, it's consumption. Alternately, there are various like financial mechanisms and games that people play trying to treat the NFTs as things that have value flow to them in some way. And sometimes that's just an ownership out of all the revenue this artist is going to make. That revenue gets distributed to the token holders, sort of like a naive mechanism. And then there's sort of more complex and convoluted mechanisms that I've seen where you might have a fungible token supply and you start playing around with the market structure around that token supply. So one of my favorite projects, and again, horrible, not financial advice and horrible investment, but great project, was called Botto. Do you know it by any chance?
I don't think so. I'm excited.
It's as interesting, hopefully, for you to hear about it as for me to talk about it. Okay, so Botto was built by a bunch of smart contracts, Web3 people, and then an artificial intelligence artist who knew how to do sort of generative visual art using neural networks pretty early on. So, rewind a year and a half back, you don't have DALL-E, you don't have Stable Diffusion, it's not trivial. And so some of his results were absolutely fantastic, and he's been exhibited in museums and so on. Botto has the algorithm to manufacture, to dream up the visual art. And then, it has infinite supply because it's a computer or it's a machine. And then Botto had a liquid token. And if you buy the liquid token or if you hold the liquid token, you can vote to curate out of all of the inputs that Botto is manufacturing. And so there's the human curation for the best like image or whatever image. And this thing works in seasons. So every week it generates a whole bunch of stuff. And then the human curation layer, based on ownership of the token and the governance therefore, selects the different like art pieces, and the top selected art piece kind of wins. And that becomes minted as an NFT by the system for that week. Now, that NFT is then auctioned off on a market venue. So something like, I think they were using Foundation at the time. And the first one went for 300,000, something like that. the second one went for substantially less and less and less because of how, the math works. And then once you sell that NFT, right, the artist and the human have created these objects. They're sold. They generate value. That value flows back to the treasury of Bado, the autonomous artist. And then the treasury uses that cash to buy back on the open market the fungible token of Bado itself. So if you select good art, the correct loop is that the art will be valuable, and then therefore the value of the token goes up because of the buyback, taking the external currency and reducing your token supply, buying it into your treasury and burning it. So it sounds fantastic. The art was awesome. All the mechanics were great. The problem is order of magnitude. The market cap went to something like 50 million because it also had these staking and kind of like liquidity farming dynamics early on. So you were encouraged to get a lot of the tokens to put liquidity into a Uniswap pool so that you could trade this thing back and forth because you need it to support the overall program. Then there was like rewards if you participated in different ways. Anyway, so if you have a market cap of 50 million and let's say your piece of art sells for 500K, the impact on the value of the token is essentially negligible. So once people realize that the whole game doesn't really matter, they start leaving and they start selling your token, and then it's a recursive death spiral. But for like a beautiful week, for like 1 week, there was this promise of an autonomous, AI human artist that lived on chain, that was governed by token holders, and that was kind of like this perpetual energy machine composed of artistic NFTs. And I thought that was just like so poetic and so interesting until, of course, it was not.
Until the party ended. No, I mean, that's fascinating. And we thought, there's certain ideas in there that we thought a lot about early on, and still some that we think about implementing in the future. Specifically this idea, that you could, and songs are being purchased from angelbaby, and a percentage of those profits go to a treasury that then people can, vote to control where angelbaby spends their money. But what we've also found, which is I would love to introduce all sorts of fun economic games into what we're doing. But I think what we've also found is if we're really trying to make angelbaby and the other Metastars, the plan here is to create a roster of these Metastars as accessible as possible, and this experience as accessible as possible. It really needs to be something that you can explain to to your mom or dad, and to a 16-year-old, 17-year-old that doesn't necessarily know anything about crypto, but maybe maybe has played a lot of video games in their life. And if you can create something akin to that, I think there's a lot of fun to be had, and something that is more likely to get people into Web3 than some of the admittedly more fun but more complex models that exist out there. We've Bored Apes is a great example. Like, Bored Apes isn't very complicated. You buy the ape, you now own the IP. You can use it on Twitter, and the economic value there. I still think that the importance of owning that IP is more valuable than people give credit for, because what's happening there is obviously as other people are monetizing that IP, you now own a part of that collection. And I think that's something that more people can inherently grasp, especially since most NFTs right now at their core are, or at least the mega popular ones, are media. And media is supposed to be fun. And if you design a game that may end up not being fun, it's going to create issues down the line. And that's a balance that has been we've had to strike that balance of how do you create something that is interesting and valuable in Web3, and how do you create this experience where an NFT is unlocking an experience and where there's some value to it, but how do you also do it in a way where it is still fun and the chances of it, the fun stopping are low. And that's how we arrived where we did, which was basically you have this opportunity to be part of the artist journey. And there's some things we're thinking about doing with IP down the line, which I could get into on the music side, but it's been a difficult balance to strike. If I think about, the ideas we had early on and then where we ended up, it was a lot of how do we make this as simple as possible?
Yeah, and I think you also have to make the artist known and popular, right? And that's almost like the prerequisite for the governance bit to be interesting. That's not easy at all because so much of that is kind of rolling the die. Well, this has been fascinating. I think while it may feel to many listeners that this is like really out there or on the frontier, my sense is that we're going to see more and more blending of media and digital spaces, and people are going to be using words like futurism and metaverse and all of that. And that cloaking ourselves in avatars is just one more trivial thing that in 10 years will be very commonplace. And so congrats on doing such pioneering, cool stuff. And if you wanted our listeners to learn more about you or about Hume or angelbaby, where should they go?
Go to Twitter, follow @WeAreHume, follow @angelbaby. And also if you want to go to wearehume.com, more there.
Awesome, David. Thank you so much for joining us today.
It's been great. Thanks for having me.
Hi, everyone. That's it for this week's episode of the Fintech Blueprint. For more technical deep dives into all things fintech and decentralized finance, check out fintechblueprint.com and grab a free subscription to the newsletter. This is Lex, and I'll see you next time.